You want me to go first? Okay, I'll go first. Hi, my name is Lisa. I'm a recovering codependent. Very grateful to be here with all of you.
And I am Chris, and I am codependent as hell. And I'm getting to be kind of proud of it.
Oh, that's new.
Yeah, it is now. It is now.
Hi, we're very grateful to be here with you and to share with you about conflict and how conflict can actually be something that's healthy and helps us to grow in our recovery and helps relationships to grow stronger. Do you want to take that, or am I reading it?
I can read it.
Okay.
All right. So from our daily reader in this moment, I'm going to read from April 29th. In this moment, I recognize that conflict can be good. As a codependent, controversy and conflict are things that I have often preferred to avoid. Working through these uncomfortable feelings with the help of my sponsor, I've learned there are healthy ways to address issues. I practice my new behaviors within the CoDA program. If I don't like the way meetings are held, literature is distributed, or group monies are spent, I can ask for and participate in a group conscience. Things don't always go my way, but I feel good that my opinions are heard. Today, I view conflict and controversy as opportunities for growth.
Okay, first thing we wanted to do is talk about different types of conflict. And so when Chris and I were talking, we thought about the long-term conflict, and some of you may know about this, maybe in families or long-term relationships where, there's a conflict or some topic that just is constant. It doesn't get resolved. It just goes on and on and on and on and on and on and on. We also talked about the conflicts that come up out of the blue. And I think what was read in this moment is kind of one of those when we're doing service work and suddenly, there's a conflict because people don't agree on something. But that can happen anywhere, anytime as well. And we also talked about different areas of life where conflicts can occur. So how about family? Anybody ever have conflict in the family? Yeah, for sure. Work and school, because for some of us, school might be our work. And if there were young people here as well. How about with friends? We can have conflict with our friends sometimes. Out in the community, I know that I was just speaking with the lady who cuts my hair, and somebody found out where she was from and automatically tagged her as the bad person politically and just went off on her. Just standing there with her friend, just because of where she was from. It was automatic. Service work. How many people who do service have encountered conflict in service work? I see some smiles and some hands. Yeah. And that's not a bad thing. And we're going to definitely talk about the traditions and the history of the traditions and, how service work and doing service in 12-step recovery is how all of this came about. Ever have a conflict within yourself? Internal conflict? Yep. And if you do inner child work, you could have multiple conflicts. It's delightful. And we also talked about a couple other things. You could have two people that have a primary purpose that's different, and that can create a conflict, right? This is why I'm here. This is why I'm here, but they don't match up, and that can create conflict. And another thing that we talked about a bit, and we'll go into in more depth, is outside issues. Outside issues that have no bearing on the relationship or within a group of people can definitely contribute to conflict. And so these are some of the things that I'm hoping that all of you will be thinking about. Have a conflict in mind, and we'll talk about that when we move towards the break. Be thinking about a conflict that maybe you're dealing with. Maybe it's new, maybe it's long-term, maybe it's internal. We'd like you to have that in mind as we move forward. So will you do the next part, please?
Sure. So one of the things that we like to do is have breakout groups. And the subject that we have for our first breakout, which we're actually going to have a little early here, we're going to have it here in a couple minutes. What feelings come up for you when you are facing a conflict? Sometimes, I have a family get together that I am not looking forward to going to. So I have these feelings that are building up day after day in front of a holiday event. Or, I'm out in public and somebody says something, and all of a sudden my feelings come on in a rush. And all of a sudden I find myself in the middle of a conflict that came up out of the blue. But one of the things that I think is important is for us to recognize what are our feelings when we get into a place of conflict.
Everybody, thank you. I hope that your breakout time was as wonderful as ours. It was really good to kind of explore some thoughts and feelings that come up and to hear other people's perspective. We wanted to start off with reading a definition of conflict, and there's actually a few different ones that we wanted to share. This is from a well-known dictionary. I'll leave the name out, but so the first definition is fight, battle, or war. And I don't know, I thought that was pretty apropos for some relationships I've been in. Second one, competitive or opposing action of incompatibles, antagonistic state or action as of divergent ideas, interests, or persons. And finally, this one, mental struggle resulting from incompatible or opposing needs, drives, wishes, or external or internal demands. And I will turn it over to my partner here.
Thank you.
Mhm.
So one of the things that I was really motivated to try and convey is that conflict in and of itself is not automatically bad. There's certainly examples of bad conflict. There is the complete avoidance of a difference of opinion, say, and one person completely avoiding it, and the other person getting their way all the time. That's an extreme situation where the conflict at the end of the day is not resolved, and it just gets worse and worse and worse because it just keeps building. This pressure of unresolved conflict, that's one extreme choice that people make, and that's not good. And it's not good for either party, and it's not good for situation. I know in my first marriage that, there were times that a discussion would come up and there would be a conflict, a difference of opinion, and then we'd walk away and we wouldn't say anything, but both of us were thinking about it regular, and it just kept building up and building up, and the pressure was there. There was no resolution. That's not healthy for anyone involved. But on the flip side, conflict can be good. If there's healthy communication, then there's the opportunity to express a perspective that maybe the other person doesn't have, doesn't know, hadn't thought of. And when we use the group conscience process, that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to have a healthy conflict where people have from different perspectives say, this is what I think is important. And then the other person says, this is what I think is important. Part of that equation is two people are listening to each other, or a group of people are listening. And there are times that I have gone into a group conscience and I have one perspective, but what I hear from someone else says is I can bring that in. I can turn it over. I can take what I like and I leave the rest. but it may shift me off of what I rigidly held before it started. Another word for that in my book is growth. Okay. When things are easy peasy, I don't grow. I'm not challenged. I'm I I get set in my ways. I need conflict in order to grow, is what I've come to believe.
You're looking at me.
I
What
was
am I doing?
wondering if you wanted to speak to conflict.
Sure. So, I am learning in my recovery not to label things as good or bad, because I find that it doesn't help me. It actually can turn into a shaming kind of message, like, oh, that's bad, or this is good. And um, I'm really focused in on being in the moment, taking things as they come and dealing with them as they come. And so I am of a similar mind that conflict in and of itself is not bad. It's not necessarily good. It just is. It's going to happen. And what I've really come to understand as well is that my life, both my professional life and my recovery life, is centered around dealing with people. And as soon as people come into the equation and into the mix, there is the potential for conflict. There is the potential for difficult and challenging things to come up. And so I had a sponsor a long time ago, and those of you who know me, you've heard me talk about this. She was a master gardener. And she told me that everything needs poop to grow, but she used that other word. And so we chose fertilizer. Everything needs fertilizer to grow. And to piggyback on what Chris was just saying, I don't grow when things are nice and tidy and there's butterflies and rainbows all over the place. I grow when I go through difficult and challenging situations. And in fact, my first sponsor in CoDA told me that when people address difficult or challenging situations, conflicts, there is the potential for a relationship to grow stronger and deeper. This was news to me. I did not know this, nor did I ever have anybody in my life at that time who was willing to do that. Because it takes, in this case, if we're talking about, relationships with just another person, it takes both people being willing to participate in that. If it's a group, which was what the traditions were originally designed for, again, it takes all of them to be on the same page to agree to some certain things, right? And so that was the key to me learning how to deal with conflicts in a healthy way. And there was no better place in my world at the time than in service work. Service work is where I really got my feet wet in learning how to deal with conflict. Because here you've got a group of what, 10, 15, 20 or more people. And in the days when I came into CoDA, we could have 30 or 40 people in a meeting every night. And then there would be the business meetings and blah, blah. And so there were amazing opportunities for growth in those situations. And so I do not, in general, avoid conflict today. But I do some things that we are going to be talking about after the break, where I utilize tools of recovery, and those include the traditions. And so I don't really have you. Well, welcome back, everyone. I hope your break was refreshing. I always like to have a break in between. And I just have to say, I'm so grateful to be here with all of you. Chris is doing the important job of getting more coffee. So I'm going to go ahead and get us started. And anybody who knows him knows coffee is his gig. Anyway, so I wonder if many of you or any of you have noticed that in our literature, you will see the 12 steps and 12 traditions of AA in our literature. Has anybody noticed that that's there? Have you ever wondered about the why? Because there's a why. Yep, I see Jeannie raising her hand. And so there is a why. It is intellectual property, so it is a legal issue, and AA will let anybody adapt the steps and traditions to their group, but they ask that you give a nod to AA. And so with that knowledge and understanding, I think it's important to acknowledge why we have the traditions. So back in the day, it was at about 10 years in-ish, it was noticed that AA was not doing well as a group. Like individuals were getting sober, staying sober, long-term sobriety at that point. There were people that had, multiple years. However, they noticed that there were some problems with the group. And so I went to the AA website just to get a real brief rundown on how the traditions came about. Bill W. printed an article in their publication, it's called The Grapevine, about 12 suggested principles to help AA as a group. And the following year, for 12 issues, he printed he had printed, an article on each tradition. And in 1950, at their first service conference or international convention, they approved them. And the whole idea was I believe he recognized, and others probably did too, that the group would not sustain. It was not sustainable the way it was going. Each group was doing their own thing. And so what I came to when I was driving home to be here today is that these traditions were born out of conflict. They were meant to be a roadmap or a guide for groups of people to get through conflict and to be able to interact with each other in a healthy manner. And it doesn't matter if it's a group of 2 or 200. That's what these were designed for. And so I thought it was important to kind of give a little nod that way and to understand how they came about. And what I love about what CoDA is doing is CoDA is taking these traditions and making them very specific to relationships, whether it's an intimate relationship, or maybe it's a relationship with family members, extended family, children, or, that sort of thing, work relationships. It can be with any relationship. We can use these principles to help us guide through conflicts and navigate conflicts. So that's my piece right now. Are we still pushing buttons?
We've pushed one set of buttons. We'll switch back and forth.
Okay, so I'm going to turn it over to Chris, and we're going to start talking about one last thing, because there's always one more thing. I would like to ask of all of you to have a conflict in mind. Maybe it's an ongoing conflict. Maybe it's a new thing that's just popped up. Maybe it's one you've been avoiding, because we do that. Or maybe it's the flip side and you're trying to get your way in the conflict. Whatever it is, if you could have a conflict in mind, our goal is to go through the traditions. We're going to tag team back and forth, and we're going to talk about how the traditions can help us in conflicts. And then we're going to have a breakout group for y'all to come together and talk about that conflict if you wish, or if you don't want to talk about the conflict specifically, but talk about maybe something you might have heard or learned that could assist you in navigating that conflict. So I am going to turn it over to my husband. He's going to start off. We're going to tag team back and forth, and I'm going to go push a button for coffee.
Excellent. And so the only thing that I wanted to add to what Lisa had to say was that when as I personally have been going through these conflicts in my life since I've been in program, what I've come to realize is that the steps are very important for me to do exactly in order. That's the way I prefer to do the steps. I go from 1 to 2 to 3, because if I skip over one of the steps, then the work I do on my future steps is compromised. The traditions, however, sometimes they are supposedly in conflict, because you have one tradition that talks about autonomy and then another tradition that talks about unity. Well, how can you have both? And I think there is a way to get through that. There's a there are guideposts that we can look for to find what that balance is, even when the tradition on the surface seems to be in conflict with another one. So I'm going to start out with tradition 1. Common welfare should come first. Personal recovery depends upon CoDA unity. So the example that I thought would come to mind is, if I apply this to like a work relationship, I work with someone and they have an idea about how to do the job. and I have an idea about how to do the job, but it's different. Well, if I look at it as one of us is right and one of us is wrong, then I can sit and argue back and forth until there is a victor in this conflict. This is a win-lose relationship. This is a win-lose proposition. That doesn't help the company. My company has a goal to sell a product, in which case we have to build a product. Well, if I have somebody that I'm working with and I waste time and I waste resources in this conflict, then the company loses. But if I work towards unity, if I work towards an agreement with the two of us, A, the product could be better and sell for more money, and B, I'm not putting at risk the end result, which is my company sells a product and we make money. So when it comes to unity, if I remember that there is something that we can agree on, it's one example I've been given is if I go into a conflict and I start with the assumption that the other person is at least 10% correct, it's not always 100% to zero. If I start with that idea that the other person has something to offer and that we both want the same thing as a result, then it's not a conflict for a winner or loser. It is a joint search for a solution that both of us agree with, and that's unity.
So for tradition 2, we're looking at building consensus. So by nature, a conflict is opposing views or opposing ideas. And so it's pretty quick to identify that there's no consensus, at least initially. However, the tradition 2, where we talk about, things being decided by group conscience, can be really challenging when there's only 2 people, right? So the goal is to find the middle ground. The goal is to find, I call it consensus, places where we can agree and moving towards that. And it requires a few things sometimes, right? It can require listening, which is the big one. And in CoDA, particularly when we are in business meetings, that is the goal, which is why we don't have crosstalk. We ask that people don't respond. We listen without comment. We allow people to be where they're at. We're not trying to lobby. We're not trying to persuade. We listen to where people are at. And as Chris alluded to earlier, there are times when that can be extremely valuable. I know from my own experience, when I have listened to people without comment, and I've shut off the comments in my head, because there's a running commentary sometimes, I will find out that another person's perspective isn't wrong, it's just different. And how can we find common ground? And so learning that from service work, carrying that into an intimate relationship or more personal relationship has been a really important part of learning how to get along. Instead of I'm right, you're wrong, or you're right, I'm wrong, going through all of that, can we have a win-win? And I have found that working towards consensus is a better way than the alternatives that we have alluded to, which are either forcing my way, forcing change, or being passive and just allowing to happen whatever to happen and not be authentic to self. Okay.
So tradition 3, the only requirement for membership in CoDA is a desire for healthy and loving relationship. One of the things that jumped out about this tradition for me for conflict is, when we come into a meeting, where's there is an implicit understanding that the other person is there for healthy and loving relationships. And the implicit understanding is that I am choosing to be here because I want healthy and loving relationships. This is the definition of acceptance. Everything else is out the window. It doesn't matter socioeconomic, it doesn't matter gender, it doesn't matter religious upbringing, it doesn't matter any of those things. I want to be better in a relationship, and I have something in common with the other person. They want healthy and loving relationships. So for me, this is being open to, I've got something in common with the other person. The opinion, the action, those I may have concerns about or I have a disagreement about, but there is something that we have in common. Okay. In my eyes, I am a precious and loving creation. I am a precious and unique creation of a loving higher power. And if I can look at that other person, that they are a precious and unique creation of a loving higher power, then we already have something in common. Okay, they may express it differently, but there is something in common. They're human. I'm human, I've got strengths and weaknesses, the other person is human, and they've got strengths and weaknesses, and that's the same.
Thank you, Luke. And so moving on to tradition 4, autonomy. Many of us have heard this, I'm sure, and those of you who have been around for a while, you will hear about all groups being autonomous. They can basically do what they want as long as it doesn't impact CoDA as a whole. Well, when we translate this into relationships, we're going to talk about autonomy as it relates to the relationship. And so a conflict can come about when, I'll use Chris and I as an example, if you're okay with that. Yeah. So if he has an autonomous idea, hey, I want to do it this way. And I say, that doesn't work for me. My autonomy is over here. I want to do it a different way. We now have a conflict, right? Because his autonomy is different than mine, or mine is different from his. And so one of the things that can happen in a codependent or unhealthy relationship is that there's this idea that, well, my way's right, your way's wrong. We're doing it my way. End of discussion. I have actually lived this, both growing up as well as in my previous marriage. And so that is not how autonomy was intended to be, obviously. And so what we talk about is autonomy at the expense of the relationship breeds conflict. And so it's not an automatic that once one person gets through or the other one doesn't. This takes me back to tradition 2 and building consensus. And I'm going to tell a story about Doug.
Go right ahead.
So I'm just going to call him my brother-in-law, but he was the brother of my previous husband, but he's a very dear friend. And I remember talking with him one day, and I was admiring the living room, and the living room was just beautiful. They had this beautiful paint. He said, yeah, it took us 9 months to pick a color. We didn't paint it until we came to an agreement. And I was blown away. They're not even in recovery. Okay. And I was like, wow. Imagine that. Imagine leaving the wall the way it was for 9 months until you came to an agreement. To me, that was just the epitome of autonomy wasn't taking over. They were working towards building consensus. And I love that example. And Chris and I haven't had a 9-month one, but we have had other ones where we've gone back and forth and we say, okay, well, we haven't reached consensus. We're going to stop for a minute. So when we look at things that we want to do, maybe money to spend, maybe a trip to take, or in my case, I was doing some service work that I knew would impact our marriage. I talked with him first. I didn't just say, hey, babe, I'm doing this, deal with it. That's not okay, because that's autonomy at the expense of the relationship. So I have found that it's really important to have those conversations, be willing to pause, and be willing to work towards building consensus, which again takes us back to tradition 2. So I will turn it over to my beau.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Tradition 5, each group has but one primary purpose, to carry its message to other codependents who still suffer. Primary purpose. I really try not to have favorite traditions, but if I went down that route, this would be a contender. I truly love the primary purpose, and it has helped clarify so many things for me in my life. Um, I have I have come to realize there were times in my life that I had a primary purpose of this world, and things were easy. When I was in college, I had a goal of becoming a military officer, and my decision-making process was very easy, right up until the point that I lost my scholarship and was kicked out of the military, and then I was adrift. And then I latched onto a relationship, and that was my primary purpose. And that relationship ended, and I was adrift. So finding a personal primary purpose was important for me. And then recognizing that my primary purpose is for me. And when I compare that to, say, CoDA's primary purpose, there's no conflict there. Okay. CoDA's primary purpose does not step on my primary purpose's toe. And then with Lisa, when we started our relationship, she had one. I realized I needed one for myself. So I developed my personal, mine does not conflict with hers, and we took the time to create a relationship primary purpose. This primary purpose has been one of the best things for me to navigate. When I feel unsettled, when I feel conflict or stress inside my head, this is one of the first things I look to. Is something about this situation in conflict with my primary purpose? Or the time that I'm with CoDA, is it impacting CoDA's primary purpose? It helps me to understand why I am feeling these things that are the conflict. For me, there's fear and anger that are two big feelings that come up with conflict. And when these feelings come up, wait a second, is this against my primary purpose? So it's a great way that I use to sort through when these feelings come up, to ask that question, why?
So tradition 6, a CoDA group ought never endorse, finance, or lend the CoDA name to any related facility or outside enterprise, lest problems of money, property, and prestige divert us from our primary spiritual aim. So our 12-piece relationship toolkit talks about this tradition as focus, to keep our focus where it's supposed to be. So one way that can happen is, as a partnership, me committing him to something without talking to him first. So I had a function at my place of worship that I go to. There was a picnic, and I did not automatically assume or volunteer him to come. I went to him and asked him, would you accompany me to the picnic? And he said,
I'd love to.
yeah. However, I'm sure, I know that I have stepped on this one. I try really hard not to, but I've said yes to some things for him. And then, I get to go sort that out. But it can become a source of conflict, right? If I had committed for him to go and he said, hey, Lisa, I got something else going on, I can't go. There's a conflict right there. So it helps me to navigate a potential conflict. If it's happened, right, then I get to own it and say, you know what, I committed us to something without talking with you first. It can also be a guide how to avoid doing that. It can be a reminder to go, you know what, this taps into some of the other traditions as well. There's autonomy, there's consensus building, there's unity, right? So I have found that it's important to say, I'm going to check with my partner first. I do this at work too. I don't commit my the people that I supervise to things. I go talk to them first and say, hey, this needs to happen. How does that fit in with what you have going on? These are things that I have found to be really helpful to help navigate, actually to prevent. This one particularly is a good preventive, to just make sure that we don't commit someone else or some other people to something without speaking with them first and getting those other bits of information. I shall turn it back over to you, Lo. Mhm.
So tradition 7, the CoDA group ought to be fully self-supporting, declining outside contribution. And the principle that the relationship toolkit mentions is self-support. Wow, this is a double-edged sword, because there are times that um, I have an ego, and I convince myself that I can solve all my problems without any sort of help. And I refuse to ask for help, even when I should. But then there are the times when it's something that I should do. It is something that I need to do for myself, that I can't push this problem off on someone else. I know that before I got into recovery, there were times that I didn't want to own up to the consequences, and I wanted to push it off on someone else. And when they let me, it was now it was a self-serving, selfish choice that I made, that I used others to solve my problems. So I've got a bunch of codependent behaviors that are tied up with self-support, both the control and the avoidance. So this is one that this is a preventative thing. In my 4th and 5th steps, I learned where I was stepping on this tradition, and it was causing problems in my relationships with others. So for me, this is part of my integrity. I need to ask for help at times, and I need to do the task in front of me for myself, for my own self-esteem. So it's when I feel dirty about the things that other people do for me, there's something wrong. And this is a tradition I look at. Did I violate my own tradition 7?
Okay, piggyback on that just a little bit.
Sure.
Because I don't know if y'all have had this problem, but money and relationships can get real tricky. So I like to focus on the money side as well, that when we talk about being self-supporting, we're also talking about the finances, that one doesn't get to make all the decisions or say what's going to happen or not, that there's a level of equality there. And so the whole idea of self-supporting in this context is that we work together, we make those decisions together. It taps into communication, taps into building consensus, it taps into autonomy. In fact, we have dealt with that because there are some projects in our home that need to get done. He had a list of priorities. Actually, our list of priorities were the same, but they were in different order. That was interesting. And so that's a conflict, right? It wasn't a nasty conflict, but it was a conflict. And we took the opportunity and time to talk it through, to hear each other's, we'll call it pros and cons on, why we think this one should be first, etc. And ultimately we came to an agreement. But it took some time. It wasn't like a 5-minute conversation and we were good. So I think it's important to remember that when it comes to finances and relationships, and it's not just intimate relationships, it can be finances in many different areas. How about finances with our kids? Hello. Those are areas where it can be really helpful to keep this in mind. And thank you for letting me piggyback on that. Mm-hmm. So tradition 8 reads, Codependents Anonymous should remain forever non-professional, but our service centers may employ special workers. The whole idea around non-professional is no money is involved. So when we talk about an intimate relationship or relationship with family and friends, the 12-piece relationship toolkit talks about unconditional love, giving without strings. So giving with strings will create a conflict. I would like to believe that you all might agree with that. And it can cause problems because immediately it's an expectation. If I do this for you, I expect that you're going to do this for me. And there's bean counters, that, okay, I gave this much, this person needs to match that or I'm out. It can be like that. And so tradition 8 can be a way to identify the type of conflict, if there has been giving with strings, if there has been giving with expectations. And so when we flip to the other side and we look at unconditional love, how do I give without expecting in return? Do I stop doing loving and caring things because there's a conflict? I love my husband and we can have a conflict. That doesn't mean I get to be a jerk to him. I usually make him coffee every morning. If we're having a conflict, I'm not going to stop making coffee because that's a loving thing to do, right? And so for me, it's a way to navigate, understand what a potential conflict might be. Maybe I need to make some amends. Maybe I need to change how I'm approaching somebody. Maybe I need to take a look at, am I giving with strings? Do I need to back that train up and go, you know what, stop. You either give unconditionally without strings or you leave it alone, right? So I find that tradition 8 can be really helpful in making sure that it's not a tit for tat, you do this, I get this. It's giving without strings. And one of my favorite ways to do that is when I'm in line at the drive-through to get my favorite fall beverage and I pay for the person behind me. Don't know who's in the car, what they've ordered, but I find that it is an amazing way to practice this. And I can do it with others. And the key is to not get caught or found out, to do it anonymously. And we'll be talking more about the anonymous part later, but it just brings such joy and it can get me out of myself when I got those ingrown eyeballs so focused in on myself and how screwed up everything is or how screwed up I am, blah, blah, blah. It's a way to get the focus off and to put it where it belongs. And I shall pass to you, love.
Okay, so
We're doing good. We're
Yeah,
fine.
we're
Just
doing
keep
right.
going.
so tradition 10.
You skipped
I'm
one.
sorry, 9. CoDA never be organized, but may create service boards or committees directly responsible to those they serve. This is for me. I believe that this is also part of self-supporting. When when our relationship started, Lisa was much better at taking care of personal finances than I was. And what it was important for me was that I need to learn and get better at that strength. So if she is, for whatever reason, she's got a problem with something happens with her family and she has to go be with her son for whatever reason. I cannot be dependent on her to be there every time to accomplish that task. I need to learn to do that and not expect it of her. At the same point, I had a convertible Mustang when we got married, and it was stick shift. I requested that she get over her nerves to drive that car, because what happens if I got sick and we were out at an event and I got sick and she needed to drive home? So it's perfectly reasonable to have strengths be reflected in where we do our tasks. But it's also important to not make that an expectation, not to be dependent on her doing that thing all the time and me doing my thing all the time. So of course there are exceptions, but that's on a one-by-one relationship, and that's the same thing in a group. There are, when there is a group, there are strengths, and it's okay if people tend towards those strengths, but it's also important to have someone ready to step up if they are unavailable for some reason.
So tradition 10 is about outside issues and not having an opinion on outside issues, and how that translates into relationships is looking at potential outside issues is it fundamental to the relationship? So I will use a very hot topic for me is politics. Politics are not fundamental to our relationship. And if it were to be brought in as if it were fundamental to our relationship, Lisa will lose her mind. I don't do well. And I have history with that, and I admit that. And so I have learned with Chris, and I've learned it in other areas, that what could potentially be an outside issue is really up to the persons in the relationship to define what's outside and what's not. So in CoDA, it's pretty easy, right? We're focused on healthy and loving relationships and recovering from codependency. Anything outside of that, outside issue. So for us, it was important to determine what are the fundamentals of our relationship. Those are the things that we can look at as part of the relationship. So if you've got people who are in a political campaign and they are working for them, politics is part of their relationship in it, isn't it? It wouldn't be an outside issue for them. That is fundamental to their relationship. And so what I've come to understand is that when outside issues come in that don't belong there, that are not fundamental to the relationship, affects unity immediately, affects primary purpose. If we have a primary purpose in the relationship, even if it's as simple as, you know, you and I want to be friends and we want to do what it takes to maintain that relationship, we need to take a look at that and say, hey, maybe this isn't a good idea. So in the 12-piece relationship toolkit, it talks a lot about conflict in this area and cultivating understanding what is fundamental to the relationship. And the last paragraph, I was going to quote it. I'll leave it alone because we don't need to. Y'all know where it is. But be really, I found that it helps, and to be careful about bringing in outside issues. And I'm passing it over to you because we're doing great.
Okay. Tradition 11. Public relations policy is based on attraction rather than promotion. We need always maintain personal anonymity at the level blah, blah, blah. Yeah, exactly that, word for word, blah, blah, blah. I don't know about any of you. I know that one of the biggest things that brought me into recovery was the feeling that other people were controlling me, pushing me around, forcing me to do what they wanted. I have a long history of feeling judged and manipulated, and I hated that feeling. When I got in my 4-step, I realized I had taken those lessons to heart and was doing them in my own relationships. I don't want to be like that anymore. I want to make a decision on my own based according to my principles. And one of those principles is not to manipulate others to doing what I want to do. Okay. I know for certain that if someone, this is still a trigger for me, if someone comes and tries to manipulate me into doing their bidding, I will get a knee-jerk reaction and I will get hot in a hurry. It's also a source of guilt and shame, because if I recognize that I have started to do it, now I've got an internal conflict, because now all of a sudden I've gone back to my old codependent behaviors and trying to get my way. I'm being selfish. This is a direct avenue into shame and guilt. So, and that's what happens internal. I know what it happens like when people were doing it at me. So if I spot it, I got it. And I don't want to treat people that way. I want to be treated with respect. So it's a big thing for me not to do this with others.
In tradition 12, anonymity is the spiritual foundation of all our traditions, ever reminding us to place principles before personalities. And quite often we hear, at least I do, I hear principles before personalities kind of echoed through the whole room when that tradition is read. And so if I look at a conflict and I see that reverse where it's personality over principles, well, I'm not doing that for them because of who they are or what they did or didn't do. That's not what was intended here. What was intended here is that idea that I don't let my feelings dictate what I'm going to do or not do. And in fact, there's a really great quote from the 12-piece relationship toolkit. It says, in recovery, we begin to separate our feelings from the facts of the situation and to identify the right course of action by applying the principles that we've learned throughout the 12 traditions. And it is suggested that tradition 12 is the lens by which to look at all of the traditions. The idea that I'm going to treat people equally, regardless if I like them or not, or I'm pissed off at them or not, or maybe they've harmed me or not. I had a really great example of this in a meeting once. There was a woman, I probably had like 10 years, and she had 20 mega years. And there was somebody with maybe 1 or 2 years was talking about a very difficult situation that she had to deal with. And this woman out loud just started saying that it was ridiculous what she had to say, and what she has 25 years, what she had to say was more important than other people. And I just sat there going, oh my gosh. And I was just blown away. Now that same woman was in one of those scooters because she was a little bit more mature and she was having trouble walking. And she needed someone to open the door. And I went over and I opened the door. I didn't open the door because I liked her or liked what she said. I opened the door because it was the right thing to do, to be of service in that moment. I didn't have to agree with her. I didn't even have to like her. But I can feed back to what Chris was talking about, she's one of God's kids too. And sometimes I want to be the favorite. Y'all ever want to be the favorite? It's like, I'm God's favorite. I used to have a friend who would say that. I'm sure I'm God's favorite. And I'm like, no, honey, it doesn't work that way. But the truth of it is that we're all God's favorite. We're all creations of a higher power, whatever term we use. And I don't want to just lock it into God. And the humility that it takes and the self-esteem it builds to do the right thing, regardless of how I feel. Now, I want to put a little plug in there that if there's safety issues and that sort of thing, I'm not talking about that. I'm not talking about that. If there are safety issues or other issues that can put any one of us in harm, don't do it. It's not like that. Call somebody first. But in general, particularly in service and in other areas of our lives where those sorts of issues aren't involved, this is what it's about for me, what I've learned, and it helps to bring the conflict down. So with that, we're going to move into a breakout group.
Yeah.
Come back. So I'm just waiting for everybody to show up. So at this point, we're just going to talk about a couple little small things. We're going to leave as much time as we can open for questions. We are willing to stay after for at least 15.
Yeah.
At least 15 minutes afterwards. So if there are additional questions or anything, because we did our best to manage the time, but I don't know if you guys know what it's like, but when recovering codependents start talking, we just keep going and going, and I love it. I am not complaining. So I wanted to acknowledge something that happens for me sometimes when I'm in a conflict, and I'm titling it "In Over Your Head." Are you in over your head? Are you unsure what to do? Did hearing all of this just leave you going, your eyes roll back and you just kind of fall back? So what I've learned in my recovery is if that happens to me, I need to roll it back to the steps. I need to roll it back to my tools for recovery. And so what that can look like, ask for help. Ask for help. So go to a sponsor, go to a trusted CoDA friend. Stress busters. This comes straight out of the Tools for Recovery. We have a booklet called Tools for Recovery. Unfortunately, I think it's in the other room, which is fine. Don't worry about it, babe.
Okay.
It's fine. It's really fine.
I got it.
You're right. I know. I'm being silly. So Tools for Recovery. Talk about stress busters. Slow down. Take care of yourself. I heard something recently from somebody. Conflict requires forgiveness. conflicted behavior can't bring peace. So if there's no peace, we need to get back to a place of peace sometimes. I know I do. Affirmations, relationship building, gaining insight, sort it out before attempting to resolve it. For me, that might mean an inventory, might mean looking at steps 1 through 9. It could mean a lot of different things. It could just be journaling, just getting a vent, just doing a verb, a dump from the brain and just get it all out on the paper. I highly encourage people to do that if you're feeling in over your head. And always, 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 we are a spiritual program, and we're taught not to be shy about talking about higher power. Don't be afraid to check in with higher power. Don't be afraid to go, God, or whatever you call your higher power, and just get it all out. I have found that these things are helpful to me if I'm in over my head. So with that, I am going to stop talking. We can try to take a question.
No, I think let's go ahead and close, and then we will be around for at least 15 minutes for Q&A afterwards.
Perfect.
But let's respect the 4:30.
Okay, so time boundary being respected, we are going to respectfully turn it back over to Michael. We want to say thank you for allowing us to be here to share with you. My hope is that we have helped you in some way, even if it's just one person, it's good enough.
Yep.